All right, guys, so for this next part, we're going to be talking about ideas, themes, primary, secondary, and tertiary thinking is a part of that like linear process, if you will. Whenever I'm looking at competition specifically, I want to start with a main protein and utilize that as many ways as I possibly can. And then that kind of also falls into like a primary, secondary, and tertiary line of thinking. So when I'm putting together the kind of theme, if you will, I also got to highlight those proteins specifically that I'm using. If it's a chicken, I'm going to highlight the breast, roasting it, as well as a secondary, either sausage or braised component to it, and then a tertiary component, and that could be like a pate or maybe even a small meat pie or ravioli where it's in there, but it's not really kind of the big picture, if you will. So the idea of primary, secondary, and tertiary goals is that everything always supports your primary. So if chicken and fall is my primary focus, then my secondary kind of line of thinking, if you will, I should be choosing vegetables and cooking methods that are familiar and people can relate to during fall and that time of the year. So I'd be utilizing different squashes, potatoes, different types of cabbages, fall leaf greens like mustard, collards, Italian kale, maybe even some different kinds of nuts, whether it be pecans, walnuts, pistachios, almonds is another great one. And then the tertiary component, it's really that idea of it's in there, it's supportive of these other flavors like thyme, shallots, wine. They're really meant to highlight those other secondary and primary components. The next part that I'd really like to dive into a little bit is the Keo method. And I've used this method before when I'm kind of doing my recipes for specifically competitions. It never had a name when I've used it before, but I recently took a course, and this method, the Keo method, was developed by a chef by the name of Keo, and then Chef Ford kind of adapted it a little bit when he was on the Culinary Olympic team. And this is a 9-part kind of method of building a recipe. So the first step would be to gather all of your ingredients for the recipe. Excuse me. The second step is weighing all the ingredients in their respective container. Then the third step is to produce the recipe to taste just the way you like it. The fourth step is weighing the remaining ingredients in the containers. Then the fifth step is recording the process. The sixth step is doing the math. So you're going to take the ingredients that are in the container, subtract what you used, and then that gets put into your formula. Step 7 is writing the recipe. Step 8 is having someone else test the recipe. And this is a really important step because if you're doing this recipe, you may miss steps or miss something where, and I'm guilty of it as well. As I'm building a recipe, I'll add a pinch of salt or a pinch of pepper just to, it needs just a little bit more. But if you tell someone else to say, hey, I want you to do this recipe, so you're going to scale the ingredients, you're going to do it just the way it says, and then you taste it, and if it's different from you, that'll develop or kind of tell you how well you wrote the recipe. And then the 9th step in the Keo method is adjusting accordingly. so that when you hand this recipe to someone else, or whether you're making it yourself, the recipe stays very, very consistent.